You working on your end?
Yeah, I'm trying to get it to come up on my phone here. There we go. Got it.
Whose feet are that behind your shoulder? I've never noticed that.
Oh, those are evidently my feet.
I love that.
My sister Debbie made that for me. I just saw on the back. It was a birthday present in 1997.
Wow.
Right when I first started preaching, I guess.
I was gonna ask this when you started. That's cool. That's really cool.
So anyway, I mean it's a nicer representation of my feet than actual like the actual.
For sure.
All right, we got a few people coming on. It's good to see y'all. It's been a while, like Katie said, long time. Yeah, things are busy summer for both Ben and I, so we're just making it work when we can.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've missed it. We've missed y'all. All right, we're going to be in James chapter 1, and we're going to look at the second half of that chapter. We spent a couple of sessions on the first 18 verses of chapter 1. Couple things to note. James is obviously writing to people who were going through hard times in their life. From the very first couple verses, we realize they're scattered, they're away from home. Probably the reason that they're scattered isn't comfortable for them. They're going through tribulations and trials. Mm-hmm. James has started his letter by saying, count it all joy that these things are going on. We'll read here in a minute. Even though we're going to talk about verses 19 through 27, I was going to start reading in verse 12, but verse 12 says, blessed is a man who perseveres under trial. For once he's been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. So what James is really writing about is he's writing to people who love the Lord, but people who are struggling to persevere through their trial. And he's reminding them that if they do, and they love God enough to persevere, then the crown will be theirs at some point. There's a blessing in it. So he's going to have a lot more to say about those kind of things. Anything you want to add before I read?
I guess I just appreciate that in the early part of this chapter, and he's going to come back to it more, but he kind of says, here's what you need to do proactively or think proactively about when you're going through hard times. Seems to me this section 12 through the next little section is a lot more warning sort of about, hey, here's some bad stuff that you may do or start doing with all the hardship going on in the world. And so be aware of both of those. There's some things I need to do proactively to keep pushing forward. And there's some things I need to be ready for to respond appropriately and not in a destructive way, in an ungodly way. That's what a lot of he's going to talk about, I think, in this next little bit.
Great. Very good. We'll talk about that more when we read it. So, all right, starting in verse 12. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then, when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. In the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits among his creatures. This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Therefore, putting aside all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness, in humility receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. But prove yourselves doers of the word, and not merely hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked in a mirror, for once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was. But one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what he does. If anyone thinks himself to be religious and yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world.
Going back to verse 12 that you mentioned, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial. Going back to verse 2, consider all joy when you encounter various trials. The interesting thing is he hasn't really said so far, in at least our last couple discussions in these first, he hadn't really said what their specific trials might be or the specific temptations or tests they might have. Verses 13 through 18, he talks about how to think about temptation, how to think about whenever you get attacked by your desires or let your desires take hold of you. So whenever I read verses 13 through 18, I think it's a fun exercise in passages like this. Okay, guys, let's go around the room. What would be some tests, some trials, some temptations that we'd be likely to face? It's interesting to me, the first one that James addresses is anger.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that would always be the first one that I would want to identify. Maybe that means I don't hate the sin of anger enough, or I'm not as concerned about anger as I need to be. But of all the things that he says, hey, Christians, when you're under pressure from circumstances or whenever you're being tempted inside, one of the most pressing, immediate concerns that we have as human beings is the danger to give in to anger. I'll just add this too. We've talked about how the Sermon on the Mount and Proverbs are really parallels to James. There's so many Proverbs about anger or about just letting your emotions control you in a wrong way. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount had like 2 or 3 sections about, don't be angry with your brother and say raka to him, or even the later part about don't hate your enemy. That's just kind of an extension of that deal. So I guess my point is that anger is a really prevalent danger that we all face, especially whenever there's some sort of hardship, bad circumstance, whatever it may be. It's right there at the very top of dangers that we face. And it's not something that's very productive or useful. Matter of fact, it does the opposite, according to this.
Yeah, very good. I was thinking as you were talking, passion it's just human, like we are passionate creatures. But I think one of the things that scripture always presents before us is there's a way to use that passion. Like even here, when he says, don't be angry, listen, he's going to steer it towards, but be doers of the work,
right?
Doers of the word. To be active takes some amount of passion, but a lot of times our passions get steered the wrong way, and we react to things in certain ways. Instead of using that energy the right way, we misuse it. We've talked about this before, but there's a almost not even a line in biblical language between jealousy and zeal. Being zealous and being jealous are pretty much the same idea.
Right.
Just how do you use that boiling passion? What's it being directed at? Something good or something bad? Do you get the sense here that when he's warning against anger in verse 19 and 20, that he could be saying you might be angry with God here? Because earlier in the text, he was saying, don't say that God's the one tempting you. I think when trials happen, there's a tendency for some of us to look up at heaven and say, hey, where are you? Why are you allowing this? Or why are you doing this? And I've met a number of people that are angry with God because of that.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. It's interesting, the paragraph before that, he talks about the brother of humble circumstance and the brother of riches too. I'm not sure. That's the other one, right? Is that whenever something bad's going on, even if it has nothing to do with you, you can just become a receptacle for my anger with whatever's going on in my circumstances. So maybe I get angry at God because I've got this sin that I keep giving into, or I've got this circumstance that's really hard for me. Yeah. Or I get angry at you because you made me do this, or, you're the reason that my life isn't good, or you represent whatever. Either way it goes, whether that anger is directed at another human being or at God. Yeah. The striking thing to me about this, and I just think this is all kind of a hard thing to believe sometimes. I think in general, we can believe it, and we can definitely believe it when it comes to other people, but it's hard to believe with ourselves always, is verse 20, that the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Because what I think is if I just, this anger, something good is going to come out of it, and I'm going to assert my power, use my passion to assert my power, and that's going to bring about some sort of good result for me. And that's really hard to stop believing in the moment, because it's, like I said, it's easy to theoretically believe that, or even believe that about other people. Ooh, you shouldn't be getting angry. But it's really hard to believe that for ourselves, especially like what you're talking about. We hear somebody talk about God in a really angry sort of way. We're like, oh, you shouldn't do that. But then whenever I'm in that spot, it's hard for me to remember to believe this and to practice it, I think.
Yeah, that's great. He talks a lot in the reading that we just had about deluding ourselves or deceiving ourselves. I'm going to attach that to like anger of man not achieving the righteousness of God. Why would we believe something like that? Partly because anger has achieved a lot of things for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like if you get mad enough, like go back to your verse 9, you got a brother in humble circumstance, and you got a guy in verse 10 who's rich and in a positive circumstance, or he's got great things going on. Look at our world right now. How many people talk about being angry about the 1% or the people that have all the things? And what are people trying to do with that frustration and that anger? Well, we're trying to change it, so maybe we can, in our anger, react to this injustice in the world. What if we can right that wrong? What if we can steal from the rich, and maybe we could even remove some of these people from power? Or there are people that even have darker thoughts about some of those people in power. Let's say we could do it. We get fueled up by all of our anger, and we create a sense of justice in our country. Hey, we just achieved the righteousness of God because we got stirred up enough to make things happen. It's just interesting that God's not going to talk like that to us. He's not going to say like, hey, what I want you to do is get really, really angry about all the things that are going on, and you go fix them in your anger. And then you're going to achieve something. Later on in the book, he's going to talk about that in a more personal way, like in chapter 3, when he's going to talk about the wisdom from above versus the wisdom from below. Bad motivations like anger, jealousy, selfish ambition are actually quite powerful things. Yes. That make people successful in life. But then it would be a mistake to equate that with the righteousness of God. Right. Hey, look at the blessings I've won for myself or the people around me because I was so angry at the injustices of the world. Anyway, I think that's a good thought. Good things to think about.
Well, what you were just hitting on there, it won't achieve the righteousness of God. It's interesting. He doesn't say it will not achieve anything.
Right.
It will achieve something, and it may even achieve a righteousness or a justice. It's just a justice of men or a righteousness of men, which really isn't righteousness. I mean, not to get into all the details of this story, but I think one great example of that is Judges chapters 19 through 21, where you've got a series of people getting angry about either misbehaviors or outright wicked things that happen. But then their anger of themselves just produces they thought it was making things right, but then every time they would make one of those wrongs right, it created another wrong and another wrong and another wrong, because they were doing what was right in their own eyes and not what's right in God's eyes. Which I think, not to go ahead and jump ahead into this, but his next thing he's going to talk about is you make sure you do what God says. Whatever anger you have, you kind of alluded to this earlier, whatever energy you have in your heart that you're upset about evil things, either in yourself or in the world around you, channel that into doing God's will, and that's how to address it. So, but before we talk about that, I'm curious, what do you say about this? Because I think this is a challenging one, because people will say, well, we're made in the image of God. We're supposed to be like the Lord. God's angry about sin and evil and bad things that happen, whether that be moral failings, injustices in society or whatever. God's angry about those things. Shouldn't we also share in God's anger for those things? And by the way, a little more close to home, we're supposed to be like Jesus, follow Jesus. Jesus got angry. Mark 3, it says he looked around and he was angry at the people that were using this disabled person for their own gain. Obviously, turning over the tables, it seems like he was angry there. So, all right, I'm not supposed to practice man anger, but what about God anger? What about Jesus anger?
Right.
What am I supposed to do about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Casey Gray just made a comment that's a little bit like that, how people wrestle or maybe try to justify the anger that they have. And they're certain, like everybody I know that's angry is certain that their anger is justified, and it's righteous anger, it's godly anger. There's something really telling though about the way you just said that. Hey, isn't God that way sometimes? Shouldn't we be that way too? I've always been struck by Colossians chapter 3, and I don't want to get us too off track, but Colossians 3 is actually a passage where we're told that we're being renewed to the image of the one who created us, there in chapter 3, verse 10. And then it like even goes on to tell us what to put on if we're being renewed into the image of God, like in verse 12. If you've been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another. What's strikingly absent there is anger.
Yeah.
Like, put these things on. We're in the image of God. But then somebody might say, well, isn't one of the things about God, isn't he angry? Yeah. But if you go back just a couple verses in Colossians 3, we're told in verse 5, consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desires, and greed, which amounts to idolatry. For it is because of these things that the wrath of God will come upon the sons of disobedience. And in them you also once walked when you were living in them, but now you also put them all aside: anger, wrath, malice, slander, abusive speech from your mouth. It just said God's wrath comes on people and immediately tells us you don't get to do that.
Right.
That's not the characteristic of God that you get to choose.
Yep.
Why not? Well, even though we're in the image of God, we're still not God.
Right.
James is going to make that point later in the book when he's going to basically say, like, listen, there's one judge, there's one lawgiver. And if we begin to believe that we are capable of looking at all of the difficulties in the world, and we can be the judge and jury about the nuances of people's hearts or their motivations or why they're doing the things they're doing, we are absolutely fooling ourselves. Like, we're not God. So just get it out of your life as much as you possibly can.
I think that's right. I mean, just to extend that a little bit more, yeah, we are supposed to be like God. That's what we're pursuing. But because of sin and because of our sin, we fall short of the glory of God. So I can't pretend that I'm not, therefore my ability to properly evaluate my anger and how to execute my anger isn't really going to work. And to me, another thing is on the Jesus point that people bring up. I'm like, okay, well, what did Jesus do when he was angry? What did he do? In Mark 3, he healed the guy. He healed somebody. So he was angry at them and he helped somebody. Which, by the way, I think is relevant to this here in James. That's where James is going to go next. He's going to talk about doing God's will. Well, what should I do? Well, like, be there for orphans and widows, care for poor and lowly people, And in the cleaning out of the temple, first of all, Mark's account makes it really clear that Jesus looked around, saw what was going on, left.
Right.
The next day came back.
After making the whip, like, he took his time, thought about it. It was calculated.
It was a calculated thing. It wasn't him flying. It wasn't him just enraged and just starts Hulk Hogan flipping tables and stuff like that. He was methodic. He was doing something. He was disciplining people. And once again, back to the point about God, same with Jesus. But even if you wanted to eliminate that, yeah, if you see something that's wrong and you can help make it right, then you should do that. But you don't hear about Jesus punching people out and stuff like that. Right. Anyway, I think it's one of those cases where it can be easy if I want to kind of justify my anger and make it righteous anger, when that's really not the case at all. Back to what you were saying earlier, we need to channel that energy into doing God's will, which is the next thing James says in verse 21. Part of the reason you don't need to let your anger dominate you and dictate your actions, because actually the only way you're ever going to be able to be what God wants you to be is when you are meek, when you're under control, whenever you have, I think the New American Standard says humility, but I think the word there in verse 21 is in meekness, which is a little bit of a stronger thing, that I'm going to be under control so that I can receive God's control and be under his control for how I'm supposed to live.
Yeah. It can also be gentleness. So here, people that are tending to be angry, he's telling them to be meek and gentle, to allow this, to do the right thing. Dude, you just gave me a sermon idea, by the way. I really liked how you said that. If you think about what Jesus did when he was angry, on one occasion he healed somebody. On another, well, and similar, but the other way he handled it was he cleansed the temple. Like the only temple you and I have to cleanse is our own. Like that's all we got. So, and that's kind of what James is saying here is, instead of being angry, verse 21, you put aside all filthiness and all the wickedness that's in you. Like you get your house in order. And then at the end of chapter 2 or chapter 1, he's going to say, and go visit orphans and widows, like go heal other people. You want something productive to do if the world makes you angry and the circumstances of the world are upside down, and you want to blame God or get mad at others, clean yourself out and heal other people. I like that. That's a really good idea.
Well, and I mean, we kind of skipped over this part. I think we'll come back to it whenever we get to chapter 3 eventually anyways, but this is so relevant for us. It's so easy now for us to violate verse 19. Everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Mm-hmm. I'm quick to get upset, and then I pour gas on that fire by just firing off a text or a post or whatever, and I just quickly say something, write something down, send it out into the internet, and then it just pours more. My fire starts spreading to other people in terms of that anger with my speech. I've got to learn, and I think, and maybe the quick to hear, I don't know what you think. I think the quick to hear in the context, quick to listen to God. It may be quick to hear other people. And I think that's certainly a good application of that concept is, hey, when you're in some sort of conflict with somebody, you need to be quick to really listen to what they have to say, not to say what you want to say. And that'll help with the anger and help with the resolution. But I think his real point is, whenever something bad is going on, whenever you're getting upset, whenever you're wanting to say, I'm being tempted by God or whatever it is, you be quick to go listen to God again. And then slow to speak your piece, and then slow to anger.
Yeah. Good. You want to comment on Katie's question? Katie's like, hey, what about the imprecatory Psalms? Like what about all the Psalms where people are praying for the destruction of others or the judgment of others, or hey, God, kick their teeth in, stuff like that. Isn't that appropriate? Is that something we learn in the Psalms? I mean, I've got a couple of thoughts about that. Number one, most of those Psalms were written by the king, who was praying that God's people be protected. Again, this is sort of one of those, we need to remember our place. We have a king, and we have a king who's dealing with those things. And what our king is commissioned from us is to share his word and hope others are saved. Because there's a perfect opportunity in the book of Acts a couple of times where the enemies of God's people are persecuting them. James and John get beaten up. There's all the leaders are threatening. And instead of coming together and praying an imprecatory prayer, hey, God, rub them out. Hey, God, kill them. Hey, God, kick their teeth in. They say, God, give us boldness to keep speaking your word. Because they knew their commission was to save the lost, not to bring down judgment. Let's let the martyrs do that. Revelation says the martyrs are crying out for vengeance. I suppose that's what I'd say is, if you end up a martyr, go ahead and talk to God about like when he's going to avenge. But for those of us on earth, he's given us our marching orders, and it's really not to go around hoping for the destruction of anyone.
Yeah. This is challenging for me for that reason. Because you look at Jesus on the cross, what did he pray? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Stephen, whenever he's getting stoned to death, he prays the same thing. But then Paul, I mean, it's not technically a prayer, I guess, but whenever he talks about people who were making shipwreck of others' faith, I
Sure.
mean, he talks about, he does say, I guess it's not as strong or as dramatic as the Psalms word it, but it's, hey, the Lord will judge. The Lord will take care of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of the point, like you referenced in Revelation 6, Lord, how long until you avenge? And the answer is you just wait,
Right.
and I'll take care of it. So I don't know how to walk that line of praying that God would do justice and righteousness, but also not being vengeful and vindictive. And that's the best. Those are, for me, whenever I run into those situations, those are just facts that I try to roll around in my head and try to pray, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to pray. This is what I want to pray. That may be wrong. I need you to fix me up on this, on my feelings about this situation, and do your will to save this person and save other people around them.
Yeah, very good. But getting back to what James says, we kind of keep going on some tangents. That's my fault. But, when he says there in verse 21, put aside filthiness and then receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. It's a very simple thing to say, but I really like the imagery of that. If you're going to try to receive something or embrace something while you're holding on to something else, you have to let go of that other thing to embrace it. You can't be hugging one thing and then embracing another. Like, you got to let go and do that. Or another way, since it uses terms like filthiness, nobody just goes out and paints their house. If you do, you're going to have trouble. Like, you need to go out and pressure wash your house and sand and get all the junk off before you put a new coat of paint up, or else it's never going to apply.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to illustrate that, but the same thing's true in our heart. If we're walking around with anger and all of these sort of filthy motivations, looking at mankind as if they're the enemy instead of the prize of God, like, we're going to have a hard time, I think, receiving with meekness this word that eventually is going to lead us to pure and undefiled religion. Pure and undefiled religion at the end of chapter 1 is not go out and kill all the people who are making orphans, or go out and dethrone all the people who are oppressing the widows. He doesn't say that. He says, go visit the widows and go visit the orphans. Right. Take care of them. Let God take care of God's stuff.
Yeah. I realize we're almost out of time, but with that in mind, the imagery of receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. There's a sort of, it goes back to that humility, gentleness, meekness quality that he emphasizes in this verse also. I want to just throw fruit at all the problems in the world. But what God is saying is, I want you to receive my word, and then I'm going to produce the fruit. That's what Paul said about this in 1 Corinthians 3, that he planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. That's true for me too. Whenever Jesus talked about the different soils in the parable of the sower, he doesn't talk about the soil being particularly active. It's whether the soil was ready to receive it or not. The problem with all three of the unproductive or bad soils is they weren't they weren't able to receive the word. Our job is to receive it. And if we really receive God's word, he's going to produce good things in our life and in the lives of other people around us. And to whatever extent is his will in the wider world around us. And so I've just got to be receiving. I've just got to have that meek, gentle, humble attitude, open soil, ready to receive it. And then God's going to produce whatever he's going to produce out of that. Things that I'm angry about or tempted to be angry about, things that I want to fix and deal with or whatever. God's saying, I need you to trust me. This is a faith thing, that you got to receive my word, be a doer of my word, and then I'm going to produce whatever I'm going to produce out of that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that. And we are out of time. So we're going to have to talk more about this last paragraph.
Yes.
Paragraphs. You good on Wednesday, I think?
Yep. Everything's looking good on Wednesday.
I should be too. So thanks everybody for being with us. We'll look forward to getting into more conversation about this part of the chapter later.
Enjoy it, y'all.